In this video, I will go over knitting basics. First, I will talk about the tools that you will need to get started. Then I will show you how to do a simple cast on. After the cast on, I will show you how to do the knit and purl stitch in both continental and English styles. The first material that you're going to need, obviously, is your yarn. Now, I recommend practicing with a size 4. It's also called a worsted or medium weight yarn. The reason for this is if you begin with a super chunky or a really thin yarn, you might have a hard time with tension or identifying the stitches. The medium weight is just right in the middle and it works out really nice. Another thing that you might want to consider when picking out your yarns is to try to look for something that is acrylic. In the beginning, you're probably going to make a lot of mistakes and you're going to be pulling back those mistakes and restarting. If you're using something like a natural fiber, like a wool, especially over time, it will fray and start to felt. So by using a less expensive acrylic yarn that kind of stands up a little bit easier, you're not going to be wasting a lot of money and ruining your yarn. The next thing you need is obviously your needles. Now, when you're going to the craft store for the first time to pick out your needles, it might become a little overwhelming with all of the different choices that you have. The first style that you might run across are these really long stick style needles. They work great for practicing. The only thing that I really don't like about them is if you're doing really big projects, you can only work back and forth. And over time, as you work, if you're doing something with heavier yarn, it can tend to pull down on the needles and that can affect your gauge. However, I really like them for beginning if you're just learning how to knit and you're doing small projects. Another needle style that you might run across are these little double pointed needles. These are primarily used for working in the round. And usually they come in sets of 4 or 5. You're going to kind of stagger these needles in a square shape when you're working in the round. However, they're really great for beginning if you want to just cast on a few stitches and work back and forth because they're super lightweight and they fit well in your hands. Another option, and probably my favorite type to use, are circular needles. Circular needles are meant for working in the round. They come in different cable lengths depending on the circumference of the item that you're making. However, you can use these to knit back and forth. The reason I like to work with circular needles is because it has a nice cable on the end that's really flexible that your stitches can fall onto as you work. And the other thing that I really like about them is that they have these little smaller tips that are really great to hold in your hands, especially if you have smaller hands. The next thing to consider when choosing your needles is the material that they're made out of. Most of the time, needles are made out of wood, plastic, or metal. I like to use metal needles if I'm working really quickly and I want my stitches to slide by very easily, like if I'm doing stockinette in the round. I like to use wood if I'm working on something that has a little bit more slippery yarn because wood provides a little bit of friction. However, if you're really unsure, you can always check with your local library and see if they have tools that they're willing to lend. Some libraries do, or you can check with your local yarn store and see if there are different types of needles that you can test out before you buy them. And the last thing to consider is, of course, your needle size. Needles range from multiple different sizes, from these little skinny ones that you would use on light things like socks or lacework, to much thicker needles that you would use for larger or heavier weight yarns. I recommend choosing a needle size somewhere between a size 7 to size 9, which is a 4.5 millimeter to 5.5 millimeter. For today, I'm going to be using these size 8s, which are 5 millimeter needles. The first thing that I'm going to show you how to do is to cast on. Now, there's a lot of different cast on methods. I'm going to show you probably the easiest one to do, and that is the backwards thumb cast on. So you're going to begin by making a slip knot. So I just wrap my yarn around my finger, and then I reach through that loop and I grab the yarn and pull it through. I'm going to place it on my needle. And I'm going to kind of cinch it up. The thing about the backwards loop cast on is you don't want to cinch up your stitches too tight because it'll make it really difficult to work into that first row when you're knitting. Then I'm going to take my yarn and wrap it around my thumb loosely. Then I'm going to rotate my thumb up like I'm giving a thumbs up. And then I'm going to scoop my needle underneath this strand of yarn and off of my thumb. I'm then going to pull that yarn very gently down. You don't want to tug it really super tight, and you don't want to leave it really loose either, just to where it starts to hug the needle a little bit. I'm going to do that a few more times here. We're going to wrap it around our thumb. I'm going to bring the needle up underneath this strand and allow it to fall off of my thumb, and then slowly pull, not too tight, around the thumb, underneath the strand, scooping it off, and then pulling it. And over time, you'll become quicker with this. And you might find that you don't have to make such exaggerated movements. You can just kind of do a little quick shoop like that. So over the thumb, underneath, allow your thumb to fall back and pull it up. I'm going to do, let's say 10 stitches. So I have 7 here. I'm going to do 3 more. Once again, don't pull that really tight and don't leave it too loose. Let's see, we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 stitches. So that is our backwards loop cast on. Now I'm going to show you how to do the knit stitch. And I'm going to show you this with the continental style first, just because this is the style that I primarily use and it's easiest for me to teach with. And then I will show you the English style. So when you're knitting for the first time, you want to keep your stitches right about where the needle starts to taper. So if you see there's kind of a little line right here that you can see, I like to keep my stitches right about that spot when I'm knitting. If they get too close to the end, your stitches can end up really tight or they can fall off. And if you're knitting too far back on the needles, your stitches can get really loose and gappy. Now, I'm a firm believer that there's no right or wrong way to hold your yarn or your needles. It's just going to be over time what works for you and what you find comfortable. Some like to wrap the yarn around their fingers to tension. I just kind of like to hold mine in the back. Now, continental style knitting is when you knit and pick the yarn, whereas English style knitting is where you wrap the yarn or throw it around the needles. So to begin, we're going to go in from the front to the back underneath this first leg of this stitch. The first stitch is always the hardest, especially when you're learning, so don't be worried if it's too loose or too tight in the beginning. Over time, you're going to become better. So when you look at the knit stitch, it's kind of wrapped like a coil. We're going to go underneath that front leg from front to back. Then I'm going to take my yarn and scoop it around, and I'm going to pull it through. You can see right down there where I pull it through, and then I'm going to pop it off the end of my needle, being careful not to pull all of the rest of the stitches off. I'm going to work my next stitch, and I'm working kind of closely here. Once again, taking my needle, going in from front to back underneath that first stitch or that next stitch, and you kind of make a little X. Then I'm going to wrap the yarn counterclockwise between those needles pull it through. And do this again. Go from front to back, making that little X shape. Wrap the yarn counterclockwise. And I'm going to scoop with my needle tip till I grab that yarn, and I'm going to pop it off the needle. Insert, and this is what is the continental version of picking. You just pick the yarn and pull it down through. And that's something that's learned over time with tension and learning how to hold your needles and yarn at the same time. Just going to pull that down through. So I'm going to work a few more stitches until we get to the end of the row here. Front to back underneath that front leg of that stitch. Wrapping the yarn around counterclockwise between the needles. Then I'm going to use the tip of that needle to scoop that yarn underneath and pop it off. Front to back, wrap the yarn, scooping that needle or that yarn, popping it off the needle. We got 3 more to go here. And don't worry about tension or whether your stitches look too loose or too tight or whether they're even. Just worry about the motions, because the tension will get better over time. And here we've come to our last stitch. Just going to last stitch, wrap the yarn around counterclockwise in between the needles, scoop it and pull it off. And now the only thing that we need to do is to turn our work so that the beginning of our stitches is on the end of the needle. So that is the knit stitch continental style. Now I'm going to show you how to do the knit stitch in English style. And all of the movements are still the same. The only thing that is different is you're going to be holding your yarn in your dominant hand and making a swooping motion instead of that little picking motion like we did before. One important thing to do is to make sure that your tail is out of the way so you're not knitting with your tail and you're knitting with your working yarn. I'm going to slide my stitches up to the end again. I'm going to insert once again from front to back underneath that front loop, just like so. And I'm going to grab this yarn and once again rotating counterclockwise between those 2 needles, and I'm going to find my yarn underneath here and pull it off. That first stitch is always a doozy. Okay, so once again, making that little X, I'm going to grab my yarn, wrap it around in between those 2 needles like so. I'm going to push my needle through until I pick up that yarn and pop it off the needle. Making that X, doing a little swoosh with the yarn, grabbing that yarn underneath, popping it off the needle. And if you're unsure of which method to do, I recommend trying both and seeing which one you're more comfortable with. I learned to crochet first, so continental was a little easier for me because I learned how to hold my yarn in my left hand, even though I'm mostly right-handed. So let's do that a few more times underneath that first loop, going from front to back, grabbing the yarn and wrapping it around in between those 2 needles, and pushing it off the needle. And like I said previously, don't worry about your tension. Some of your stitches might be really loose or really tight. For right now, just worry about the motions and holding your needles and your yarn. We have 2 more stitches. Here's our last one. Wrap the yarn in between and pull it through. So that is the knit stitch worked in the English method. If you work the knit stitch on both front and back sides for a few rows, you get this really nice little ridged stitch, and this is what is referred to as the garter stitch. Now I'm going to show you how to work the purl stitch continental style. And I've already done 1 row of knits here, so I'm going to be doing the back side in purls. If you do a row of knits followed by a row of purls and you alternate between the two, you get a fabric called stockinette, which you may be familiar with when you see a lot of knitted pieces. So the purl stitches worked very much the same way, except everything is kind of done backwards. You're still going to be wrapping the yarn in the same direction. However, you're going to be inserting your needle from back to front this time underneath that front loop instead of front to back like we did with the knit stitch. You can also think of it as entering from right to left as opposed to left to right, whichever way you want to think of it. Another thing that you're going to do with the purl stitch, whereas the knit stitch we held our yarn in the back, the purl stitch you're going to hold your yarn in the front. So you might have to find a way that's comfortable for you to be able to hold and tension the yarn in the front. I just kind of loop it around my finger and hold it down like this. So I'm going to insert that needle underneath the front of that stitch from back to front, once again kind of making that little X. And then I'm going to wrap the yarn again with my finger in that counterclockwise position. And I'm going to pull that stitch off, being careful not to pull off the next one. I'm going to bring my yarn down to the front again, always keeping it in the front, inserting my needle from back to front, wrapping the yarn once again between those needles just like we've done before, but this time I'm pushing it toward the back. Those first few stitches are kind of tricky. You want to make sure you hold on to them here. So inserting from back to front, wrapping the yarn around and back down, and just like before, we're scooping that stitch, it's right back here, toward the back and off the needle. Yarn to the front, back to front, wrap the yarn around the needle and back down and pushing it off toward the back and off the needle. And just like before, this stitch will become easier as you practice it. Don't worry about tension or how great your stitches look in the beginning. Just worry about the movements that you're doing and finding the method that works best as far as tensioning and holding your needles. So back to front, wrap the yarn between the needles and bring it down and scoop it and push it off toward the back. You're going to get these little purl bumps in the front. Wrap the yarn, push it back. We come to our last stitch, back to front, wrap the yarn, push it off the needles. So that is the purl stitch worked continental style. Now I'm going to show you how to do the purl stitch worked English style. So once again, I'm going to keep my yarn in the front and I'm going to insert my needle from back to front underneath that front leg, or you might want to think of it as working from right to left. So inserting from back to front, I'm going to hold on to my needles here, making that little X shape, and I'm going to take my yarn with my right hand and swoop it around in between those two needles. I'm going to tension my yarn and hold it here in the back. And I'm going to push that needle until I've captured the yarn strand right here, and then push it off the needle. Okay, let's do that a few more times here. Insert from back to front, grabbing the yarn, wrapping it counterclockwise between the two needles, holding on to it here. I'm going to push it toward the back. You can see that I've grabbed the yarn here and push it off the back of the needles. Back to front, wrapping the yarn between the needles. Scooping it and off the back. I recommend, once again, trying both methods to see which one works best for you. And once again, not worrying about how loose or tight your stitches are, just worrying about doing the motions. Over time, your tension will get better as you learn which methods work best for you for holding your needles and your yarn. So back to front, counterclockwise between the two needles. Off the back. And off the back. Oops. And off the back. And that is the purl stitch worked English style. After a few rows of working knit stitches on the front side and purls on the back, you'll see that we've created this stockinette fabric. And this is what you might be familiar with when you think of knitting. It creates these little V's that are in the front. So when you're identifying stitches, whether they're a knit or a purl, you can see that the V's are the knit stitches. And when we flip our work over, the purls create these little bumps or little ridges on the back side. So that is how you create a stockinette fabric. One thing that might happen when you are practicing and until you learn to identify the stitches is you may set your work down and forget if you started or ended on a knit or purl row. So one way to determine that is to find your working yarn, and if it's at the needle tip, that means that you are getting ready to start a new row. So I can see here that I have these V stitches which indicate knit stitches and the purl stitches on the back. So that means since I'm at the beginning of the row, because my working yarn is at the needle tip, that means I need to start a knit row for this side. Thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your crafty friends, as well as subscribe to my channel for more knitting tutorials.